Hi, and welcome to a special edition of Nostalgia Alley. We're joined by my co-host, the fabulous and gorgeous Joan Delaloye. And there's a lot of buzz around literary circles about a new book, and author Hope Brooks has a book called A Mother's Survival, Finding Balance Through the Storm. A single mother trying to survive sexual abuse in childhood, marriage to a man with mental illness, and the consequences of a bitter divorce. A book of survival and inspiration. Joan, start us off.
Thank you, Mike. Hope, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Joan.
Oh, it's a delight. We wanted to ask you to begin, what inspired you to write this book?
I had a very busy life as a New York City teacher and had no time for myself for many years while I raised 3 children. And after my retirement, one day I sat down at my computer and my life as I had lived it suddenly appeared before me. And I started to write about the experiences that I had. And as I did that, it became kind of a therapy for me. And the more that I was thinking, the thing that came to my mind the most was the pain that my children and stepchildren had gone through with the divorce of their parents. And then I took myself back to my childhood in Brooklyn, where life was different in those days, where families stayed together and marriage was a commitment. And as I thought about that, a darkness overshadowed me as I began to see my uncle come into my bedroom and take away my childhood. So all of the things that I experienced and the things that I had to overcome, suddenly I wanted to write down, to share with others, to tell them, to show them how I had been able to overcome so many of these things.
Was it difficult to go back into the past, these memories that you had, reliving that through the book?
It was difficult. And I found that, Mike, the only time I could write was when I was alone and my husband wasn't home with me. And I had all the time to focus on what I was thinking about. And sitting alone at my computer, I relived what I needed to.
And what was the darkest memory of those years? I remember you talked about child abuse, and tell us a little bit what went on that really affected your life tremendously.
My darkest memory, yes, is what happened to me as a child 57 years ago. And I must tell you that almost every day of my life now, I relive the fear that I experienced and the shame. And mostly as a child, I was so afraid to tell my parents of what had happened because I didn't want to hurt them, and I felt that it was all my fault.
In the book, you say you were the good child.
Yes.
Tell us about the good child and how the good child coped with the sexual abuse.
By being the good child, I had learned not to talk about anything that had happened to me. I was the quiet child. I was afraid. I lived in fear of just telling anyone the secret that my uncle had told me I had to keep. And throughout my childhood, I had learned not to talk. I would spend time alone, come home after school, go to my room, read my books, do my homework, isolate. And learning and reading became my salvation at that time, but I never learned to talk or tell about my feelings.
Joan?
Yeah, well, I'm so sorry to know that you had to go through such a horrible experience, and sadly so many men and women do go through these horrible things. I wondered what prompted you to speak out now about it? You know, was there something that you might have done differently as you look back on it?
It took me a long time to become a new person before I could speak out. As a child in pain, it was much easier to stay by myself. But as the years passed and I had to overcome other things, mainly becoming a single mother, I think at that time I was still the kind of person that hid all my feelings. My husband decided to leave me, and I had to face raising my 2 preschoolers alone. At the time, I had no job, no money. I had to go on food stamps.
Now, was this something that drew you to your first husband?
I don't understand.
Well, you were alone. You were looking to find somebody to cleanse what you went through. And you were attracted to your first husband. He was someone who could take care of you, watch over you, but it didn't turn out that way.
Well, okay, now I understand your question. And although I saw many good qualities about Drew, my first husband, I did notice before marriage, at age 21, which was quite young, that he had some unusual characteristics about him that was a concern. But at the time, I had no understanding or knowledge of mental illness or what that entailed in a person's life. He promised to take care of me, my whole life, and actually take me away from my dominating father.
But it was the reverse. The
Yes.
reverse thing happened with him. What happened? What were the things that were traumatic in that particular marriage? He had mental illness, and how did that show in the marriage?
Well, after we married, I became aware that paranoia dominated his existence. And again, I did not understand what it was. Sometimes he woke up in the morning and said, "I have a disease. I have leukemia." And we'd take him to the doctor, and he was just fine. But he would be convinced that there was something wrong with him. At another time, he was convinced that he ate pot roast that poisoned him. And he actually had a breakdown and had to be hospitalized after that. And when that happened, that was the first time that doctors put him into the psychiatric unit in the hospital, and he had a diagnosis at that point of bipolar disorder. But I still didn't know much about it. And
how did you deal with that? You're young, you're in your 20s, you don't have any experience with mental illness. How did you deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Because I was the person that I was at that time, anything that made him happy was what made me happy. As long as he was happy, I could get along in my life.
Your identity was linked to his identity.
I had no identity. That's the way I feel about it now. And dealing with his mental illness, I accepted him because I had a dream that we were going to have a family. And being brought up the way I was, that couples stayed together, the wife always paid attention to the husband's needs, I promised to do that. But
love, honor, and obey, which is, we all taught that in a marriage. But yet it's difficult for someone in their 20s.
But even it was
facing all those obstacles.
It became more difficult. 6 months after our marriage, he had an affair with another woman, which I found out about. But
how'd you find out about that?
He actually confessed it to me, that he loved me, but he was confused and didn't really know what he wanted to do at that point, to stay married or not stay married. But after having a discussion with him, he had decided to commit to our marriage. And wanting that to work out, I forgave him, thinking that he was young and foolish and was not making good decisions, and I was going to give him another chance. So things were quite challenging from the beginning in that marriage.
But what led up to the breakup? Oh, go ahead.
But also, even though I was going through this, I could tell no one about it. I held it all inside, my disappointments.
From your past experience, you will learn to hold things inside
exactly,
you.
Exactly.
Which can tear you apart, literally, if you can't really release your feelings. Very difficult. Joan?
Mike, I wanted to say, Hope, that I think it takes so much courage to write a book like that, to face all these issues in your life, you know, from the early sexual abuse, then marrying a person who had a mental illness and you didn't know it, infidelity, I'm sure the bitterness. It's a tremendous amount of things to go through in your life. It takes a lot of courage to write that all down on paper. Were there any challenges that felt insurmountable to you as you were going along?
There were so many, Joan, that felt insurmountable. Not only in my first marriage, but as the years went on. I met Ray, who became the love of my life after my first husband left me. And I had my 2 children, and with Ray, I was able to have his children come into my life, and the dream of having my family and more people to love was more than I had ever wished for. But the challenges never ended, even over the years. And not too long after Ray and I married, we found out that his daughter was not his natural child, and she was ripped from our lives. It was very painful, both for my daughters and his son. As the years went on, we had 3 teenagers that we were raising together, my 2 daughters and my stepson. And those teenage years were also very challenging. And every time I saw a new challenge that I had to face, I would say, okay, I can't do this. But then I would talk myself and remember that, yes, I could do it.
What gave you the strength to carry on? What gave you that strength to carry on? It's a big burden for somebody.
I think that what really gave me the strength was just, first of all, the love of my children. Mm-hmm. No matter what, I wanted them to have a good life. And I think it's something that's inborn with mothers, that every joy that your child experiences is something that you experience. So when my daughter first saw an ant walking across the sidewalk and was fascinated by it, my heart leaped with joy. When my children learned how to ride the bike for the first time, or to catch a ball, or to read a word, that was my joy. So I realized that you had to be happy with what you have.
Very true.
How did your friends and family react to these things? Were you able to share some of these things with them, and were they able to be helpful to you?
As the years went on, I became a stronger person, Joan. And I think the main reason why that happened was because Drew left me. And for the first time alone, I had to find the strength to face the challenges. I had to find a teaching job to support my children. And I realized that I loved my job, and it was very rewarding to work with young second graders and to feel that you can influence their lives, you can impact them and make a difference. And
give to the students what you didn't have, you can give to your students.
Yes.
Which is so wonderful.
I had my daughters, I had my students and the job that I loved, and I eventually found a relationship with Ray, and he taught me the true meaning of love and commitment. And I would say the most important thing was that I found a support group for women.
That's great. On that high note, we have to take a break for a public service announcement. I'm glad we're leaving on a high note.
Okay.
So stand by. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
After 17 years working as a mason, Mike was laid off. I met him when he came into the library looking for help. He found a job opening, but the application was only online. Mike said he'd spent his entire life around tools, but had never used a computer. I showed him how, and he ended up applying for numerous jobs online. I saw Mike the other day. His new computer skills paid off. He's working again.
New Jersey libraries are transforming lives. Tell us your story.
Welcome back to Nostalgia Alley. Our guest, Hope Brooks, a very exciting learning tool to everybody. Her book is A Mother's Survival, Finding Balance Through the Storm. I totally recommend it. It is a phenomenal book. Joan, start off with a question.
Yes, Hope, you were just starting to tell us a little bit about the role of support groups in your life at such a very tender and difficult time. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, after spending so many years of my life with never being able to talk about my experiences or my feelings, I eventually, as a single mother, found a support group for women. And I was very shocked to attend this support group and hear other people open up their hearts without fear and tell about their experiences, which were very similar to mine. Many of them were divorced parents, divorced mothers, and single mothers. And I actually made friends with single mothers that had similar issues as I did. And as the weeks went on, I became no longer afraid. And I started to speak about everything that had brought me there, to that time and that place. And I felt like I was a strong person. I felt like I was a new person. I wasn't afraid anymore. I kept telling myself, I didn't need my dad, I didn't need Drew to take care of me. I could do everything alone. I could be a great mother. I could be a great teacher. I could work hard and achieve my life goals.
So you turned a negative into a positive. Now, talking about your dad was extremely strict, and I remember a time in the book where you were sick. Can you tell us a little about that experience and what he wanted you not to do?
Interesting. I wasn't sure if it was from my father's Italian background or where he got the idea, but my parents both had the idea that water was dangerous, so that if you took a shower or bathed and went outside, you might be very susceptible to illness and germs. So when I was in the 9th grade, I had a diagnosis, and I was told that I needed to not go to school. I had a fever, and I was going to probably have to miss school for 6 weeks, maybe be homeschooled. And during that period of time, my dad said, well, Hope, you will not wash your hair, you will not take a shower or a bath, because that will make you more ill. So I just want you to know that. And one day my mom went to the pharmacy and came back with some dry shampoo, some powder that they put in my hair. And I wasn't ever really sure. I kept asking myself, is there any proof that water is harmful? I eventually, in adulthood, figured out that no, I wasn't afraid of water.
How long did this last before you could see water?
At least 6 weeks before I could bathe or wash my hair.
There's so much to talk about. We have about 10 minutes to go. But
okay.
What was a turning point in your life? Tell us about Ray. And that wasn't so easy because there were a lot of things that went on there, including the kidnapping.
Well, I had decided at one point that I was ready. I wanted maybe to find someone, the right person, because I still had that dream of having a family. And I still wanted my 2 daughters to have a figure in their lives that they could admire. They did see their dad every other weekend during most of their childhood. Sometimes he wasn't so available, but he was in their lives at least. But I had a dream. And I went to a church group, and I met a man who I was attracted to, who seemed like he had a lot to offer as we had our conversations. But one thing he told me was that right now he had 2 children and he did not know where they were. He had been awarded custody of them in the divorce between him and his wife, and she visited them one day and they disappeared. And I questioned myself and said, is he really a great man? Or is there some reason, you know, why the mother would not want the children with him? But I gave him a chance, and we started dating, and I realized what a wonderful person he was. And in his heart, and everywhere, in every way that he could, he was searching for his children.
And what actually an honest and courageous person to tell that to someone that he didn't know yet, but obviously had an interest in getting to know. Took a lot of courage for him to admit
Yes, it
that.
did. And the most remarkable thing about him was that after we dated for a while and I realized what good qualities he had, I introduced him to my children, who were 4 and 6 years old when they met him. And the joy that they had interacting with him and that he had interacting with them brought tears to my eyes, and he would play with them for hours, everything you can think of. And afterwards he told me, I miss my children and they are filling the hole that I have now until I can find them. And here it is 31 years later. And he is still the father of my
Still
children.
together. It's terrific. How does your book empower others with similar plights?
That is the reason, Mike, why I wanted to write the book. It had to have a motivation. I wanted other people to realize they could deal with the things that they had to deal with. So many times I would start my journey to solve my problem. I would climb higher to reach the top of the mountain where I would feel successful. And then I might be successful for a short time, but then the next thing would come and the mountain would crumble and I would have to start again from the beginning and start climbing. And that's what I learned. But that's not only for me. As I grew in wisdom over the years, I realized we all have that in our lives. And I wanted to give that message to other people, especially if you've been through similar experiences I have. I'd like my book to address anyone that's been sexually assaulted in their childhood, people who are thinking of divorce or are divorced and have children, so that they could understand the impact of their behavior on their children. I wanted people to understand mental illness, because it was a journey over the years, even long after Drew and I were not together, to understand that it is an illness and it has to be dealt with.
You know what I love? Your name is Hope, and there's hope in the book.
Thank you.
Joan?
Yes, do that.
I was thinking about your children, Hope, both yours and Ray's, and they both had the impact of divorce on their lives. And that is a devastating thing so often for children. How did your children deal with it?
It was very heartbreaking. I can remember when Drew first left. My oldest daughter was 3 years old. And each day, when the sun started to go down in the evening, she would run to the front window of the house and she would look out the window and she would say, Mommy, Mommy, where's Daddy? When is Daddy coming home? And I had no answer. It was so hard to say, he's not coming back. And a few years later, about 2 or 3 years later, we hadn't talked about it for a while, but I remember sitting at the kitchen table with her, and suddenly she looked at me out of nowhere and said, will Daddy ever come back to live with us, Mom?
How do you answer that question?
You have to deal with reality. You have to say, no, but we're going to love him anyway, and he loves you, and he's going to see you as much as he can. And because still wanted them to realize that their dad still loved them the best that he could.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of issues, he had a lot of problems, but he did love them the best that he could.
And that's
And
a
sometimes-
gift to your children too, because so often in divorces, bitterness, people do not speak kindly of the other person, and that person
Exactly.
is still
Well-
their mother or father. So
Right.
that's a gift to your children.
Well, we tried, but years later when I took Drew back to court for child support issues, my daughters were older, about to begin high school, and I was interested in perhaps a Catholic high school with the tuition. And I realized suddenly, in 4 more years, my daughter, who was about to begin high school, would be in college, and we had to have a better financial plan. I mean, being divorced at ages 1 and 3, we had no plan for that at all. But when I took him back to court, that's when his anger.
But it was
started to
closure. It was
occur.
closure for you. Now I gotta say something. Mother's Survival, Finding Balance Through the Storms. I love this cover. Who designed this cover? This is beautiful.
Thank you so much for asking, Mike. This cover was designed by Zoe Diamond, who is my granddaughter. She did it when she was 14, which was about a year ago. And she picked this picture, which is a symbol of the storms in the story. And she has the yellow sunlight permeating the picture from the corner to give it the symbol of hope. Like,
Now, all my readers are sitting there on the edge of their seats. How do we get the book? How do we order the book?
the book is available on Amazon and Kindle Direct Publishing. You
Okay.
just put in the title, A Mother's Survival, Finding Balance Through the Storms by Hope Brooke in Amazon, and you will find it.
And there's also a website they can kind of get to find out more information.
If you would like to contact me personally, you may contact me at, do you have it?
Yeah, well, we'll have it on at the end of the show.
Well, I
Okay.
can also mention it.
Okay.
It's H. Brooks 2014 at AOL.com. And I think too, Hope, you had mentioned that if people have comments, they could also send an email to you.
I would appreciate it if you have any questions or comments to send an email to hbrooks2014 at AOL.com, and I would be glad to discuss with you any issue that you would like.
Can't believe our time is up. Hope, Joan, fabulous show. And I recommend this book. It's a book of survival and inspiration. And this, I know, is going to be the start of many literary teas and book signings. Are you ready? Do you have the pen out
I am
for
ready.
the book
Mike.
signings?
I am ready.
Okay.
May
Well,
I just say a special thanks to you, to Hope Brooks, for your courage, your determination, a woman of great stamina and not easily defeated, that's for sure. So,
Thank you so much, but it's been a very long journey to get where I am, Joe.
Joan, should we do the close together?
okay.
This is Mike and Joan saying good night to you, and especially to you.